Welcome to the Deconstructionist Deep Dive.
The podcast that doesn't just accept the story.
We break it.
We examine the pieces.
And expose the machinery inside. Let's dive in. What if everything about the red pill isn't a truth bomb, but a psychological trap designed to be wrong?
Yeah, that's really the heart of it for this deep dive. We got a request from you, the listener, asking us to, well, take a closer look at these systems, these ways of talking that promise, hidden knowledge.
Right, these worldviews that basically swear they've got the secret key, the thing that unlocks how society really works, and that everyone else, the sheep, they're just too blind or maybe too scared to see it.
And the sources you sent over, which we've been pulling apart, they do more than just look at the claims being made, specifically within that whole ecosystem people call reactionary rhetoric or, the Manosphere, red pill space.
Yeah, it's like they give us the actual architectural drawings, the blueprint for how to dismantle the structure of the argument itself.
Exactly. So our mission today, it's almost surgical. We're not really here to debate the facts because honestly, they often get twisted so much they're unrecognizable.
Right, it's about analyzing the machinery. How does it capture people intellectually and, well, psychologically?
We found this really consistent pattern, a flow, if you will, and that seems to be the key to how these systems operate. It always kicks off with a foundational assumption, something presented as unquestionable. We're calling that the axiom.
Okay, the starting point, the given.
Precisely. And once you accept that axiom, it sort of forces you down a specific path towards an intellectual output. That's the conclusion.
And that conclusion then points towards
Well,
the end goal.
the ultimate aim, yes, the command, which is usually a policy change or a specific behavioral instruction, something concrete.
So axiom leads to conclusion, leads to command. That's the flow we're tracing.
That's the flow.
Okay. So we invite you, listening right now, trace this with us. The big questions we keep circling back to are, where's the logical jump? At what point does it stop being maybe a misleading statement and become just a self-serving demand, often an authoritarian one?
And critically, what's the cost? What are the psychological stakes, the material consequences of actually buying into this specific, very restrictive way of seeing the world?
Let's start right at the beginning then, the foundation. Those bedrock assumptions that are designed really to prop up everything else that comes after.
Yeah, the real trick, the deceptive power, it comes from how these axioms are presented. They're made to feel like gravity, like undeniable laws of the universe.
Not just ideas, but facts.
Exactly. They're framed not as premises someone chose to get to a desired outcome, but as just self-evident truths, things you'd be foolish to question.
Okay, so let's unpack that core engine. What's the first big one? You called it biological essentialism.
That's the cornerstone. And look, this isn't just saying, men and women have differences. That's obvious. This is the much stronger claim that your social value, your abilities, your whole psychological makeup, and therefore your social role, it's all rigidly fixed, determined, non-negotiably by these immutable biological categories, usually sex, sometimes race.
So biology isn't just influence, it's destiny.
Pretty much. And what's really happening is a deliberate confusion. They take a correlation, maybe a current social pattern, like one demographic being underrepresented in a certain job, and they completely short-circuit the analysis.
Instead of asking why, historically, culturally, systemically.
Right. All that messy context gets ignored. They leap straight to, it must be inherent, unchangeable biology. Gender, for example, gets flattened into this strict, absolute binary that supposedly dictates everything about you, your potential, everything.
And if you swallow that first pill, that biology dictates destiny.
And the rest of the arguments just kind of smoothly slide in place. Feels logical then.
Okay, so that rigidity, that fixed nature, it leads right into the second pillar you mentioned, the natural order fallacy.
Exactly. If biology dictates these fixed roles, well, then the social structure that reflects those roles must be the best one, the ideal one.
The natural one.
That's the claim. This axiom insists that one specific hierarchical structure, usually rigidly patriarchal, fiercely heterosexual, isn't just one way society could be organized, but the only natural and optimal state for all time, past, present, future.
Which ignores, well, pretty much all of human history and anthropology showing incredible diversity in social structures.
Totally ignores it. It's selectively blind. This rhetoric demands that any deviation from their prescribed hierarchy, whether that's different family setups, people expressing fluid gender identities, or even just questioning the authority structure, it all gets pathologized. Instantly.
How so? What labels did they use?
It's immediately framed as degeneracy or chaos or a sign that civilization itself is collapsing. It presents this one very narrow path and basically demands everyone conform.
Yeah. And to make this very ideological setup seem, I don't know, scientific, they bring in the third axiom, statistical literalism.
Ah, yes. This one it's incredibly effective. Devious, really. It involves picking out very specific, often complex social statistics. Things like crime rates broken down by demographic, maybe certain gaps in academic test score.
Okay. Data points.
Data points, yes. But crucially, and this is the whole game, they are presented without any context. Zero historical background, no economic factors considered, no analysis of systemic biases. It's just the raw number, isolated.
Data vandalism, like you said, taking it hostage.
That's a good way to put it. The goal isn't to understand the social issue behind the number. The goal is to hold up that isolated statistic as definitive proof.
Yeah.
Unchallengeable proof of inherent fixed group traits.
So it flips cause and effect. It takes a complex output of society, the result of history, policy, discrimination, and presents it as simple biological input.
Perfectly put. And if you accept that data stripped bare of all context somehow proves biology well, you've just accepted all three axioms: biological essentialism, the natural order, and statistical proof. And now the rest of the structure feels almost unavoidable.
Right. So if that's the foundation they've poured, biology is destiny, patriarchy is natural, context-free stats prove traits, what kind of house does that force you to build logically? What are the conclusions?
We see it leading straight to two main conclusions, consistently.
Okay, what's the first?
The first derived conclusion is a call for systemic segregation. The argument goes, if these groups are fundamentally, biologically, immutably different in their value or capabilities, then society's systems must reflect that.
Meaning?
Meaning things like the military, sports, law enforcement, even education. They argue these have to be segregated or strictly categorized. Why? To maintain order. To ensure fairness, supposedly.
But hang on, that's where, as you said, the skeptical mind needs to hit pause. The premise is difference. Fine, let's grant difference for a second. Does difference logically require segregation or hierarchy?
No, absolutely not. That conclusion segregation, it doesn't actually follow from the premise of difference. It's smuggled in. It's a political goal dressed up as a necessary outcome.
That leap is the point.
That leap is the entire mechanism.
It's a classic non sequitur, isn't it? It just doesn't follow. You could argue difference leads to needing, say, specialized teams that cooperate, not forced separation.
Of course. But that alternative conclusion doesn't serve the underlying power dynamic they want to reinforce.
Okay, so segregation is conclusion one. What's the second?
The second is this pervasive feeling, this narrative, that meritocracy is under siege.
Ah, the idea that fairness itself is being attacked.
Precisely. When people who've historically done well within the existing system feel anxious, maybe economically insecure, this narrative provides a ready-made explanation. It tells them why they're feeling that way.
And the reason given is?
Any attempt at promoting equity, think DEI initiatives, diversity, equity, and inclusion, or affirmative action policies, they're framed not as ways to correct historical imbalances or systemic barriers.
Is that an attack?
As a malicious inversion of the natural hierarchy. The claim is these programs are unfairly punishing the truly competent, and let's be clear, that's usually code for straight, conventionally successful men, and promoting less competent people just based on identity.
So it takes real economic anxiety, which might be totally valid.
Absolutely.
And redirects it and tells you you're struggling not because the system might be fundamentally unfair, but because those other groups are unfairly cutting in line.
Exactly. It weaponizes that anxiety. But look, purely rational arguments, they don't usually move masses of people. This ideology needs fuel. It needs emotional shortcuts.
Right. It needs ways to bypass critical thinking.
That's where the emotional behavioral levers come in. They're designed to hijack your rational brain.
Okay, how does that work? What's the first lever?
Pure fear-based mobilization. This involves using really vivid, often dehumanizing imagery or language. It's designed to punch through your analytical filters and trigger raw, tribal survival instincts.
The sources mentioned a specific example, didn't they? Something about fictional first responders. Laquina and Shakina.
Yes. And using names like that isn't accidental. It's not just a political joke. It's linguistic engineering. It's crafted to evoke a visceral fear. The implication being, see? The natural order is broken, your safety is now at risk because these incompetent outsiders are in charge.
So the goal is to make you stop thinking about policy details or complex social factors.
And start thinking purely about immediate threat. Survival. Protecting your tribe from the danger. It overrides nuance completely.
Wow, okay. And you said this fear is coupled with something else.
Yes, the second and maybe even more potent lever. the persecution fantasy. This is the narrative mechanism that frames the historically dominant group, people who largely built and still control many institutions, as the new oppressed victim class.
But hold on, that's a tricky one, because some people caught up in this might genuinely feel like things are unfair or that they're struggling. How do we acknowledge that real feeling of, say, economic struggle without accidentally validating the whole victim narrative?
That's the insidious genius of the trap, isn't it? It taps into real pain, maybe job loss, wage stagnation, a feeling of being left behind. It acknowledges that pain, but then it completely misdiagnoses the cause.
It points the finger in the wrong direction.
Entirely. By framing the dominant group as the victims, the rhetoric generates this enormous wave of outrage, a feeling of justified, even heroic retaliation against what feels like unfair treatment.
So you're not just angry anymore, you're righteous.
You're righteous. You're not seen in your own mind or community as prejudiced or just trying to hold on to power. No, you're a noble defender. You're standing up for the natural order against the forces of chaos and unfairness.
And that raw resentment, that anger,
Gets instantly transformed into powerful, politically useful motivation, ready to be aimed.
Okay, so this whole complex setup, the axioms presented as truth, the conclusions that seem to follow, the emotional triggers, it's all built for one final purpose.
Exactly. It all leads to the final step, the prescriptive commands.
The what we should do about it.
Right. And the ultimate goal here, let's be clear, it's never really about thoughtful analysis or genuine understanding of social problems. It's about consolidating power.
This is what you called authoritarian simplification.
Yes. The rhetoric consistently advocates for getting rid of complex, messy, systemic social issues through simple, punitive, exclusionary actions. The source materials are full of these direct commands. Put them in asylums, defund those programs, don't allow them in leadership positions.
It sounds less like a plan for improvement and more like drawing boundaries, enforcing hierarchy.
That's precisely what it is. It's not a platform for making society better for everyone. It's a manual for enforcing a specific, rigid hierarchy, one that just happens to benefit the speaker's own in-group. That's the final, tangible goal. That's the moment the abstract talk turns into concrete political action or demands for it.
Okay, so we've laid out the machine, and yeah, if you accept those starting axioms, it can look solid, internally consistent almost, like a mathematical proof.
But only if you agree to those initial unproven terms. That's the key.
So now we apply the analytical protocol. This is our systematic way of taking the structure apart piece by piece and finding the weaknesses, starting at the foundation.
Right. We start with node identification and flaw detection. When we isolate those axioms, like biological essentialism, we need to challenge them directly, not just disagree, but counter them with the best current understanding of reality.
So bring in modern biology, neuroscience.
Exactly. Show the overwhelming evidence for spectrums in sex, in gender identity, incapability. Demonstrate that human potential isn't rigidly fixed at birth, but incredibly plastic, highly dependent on environment, opportunity, culture, not just predetermined by these narrow binary traits they insist on.
And you mentioned history is crucial here too.
Absolutely vital. We have to highlight the historical precedent, show that this exact type of thinking isn't new. We've seen this movie before.
Like with phrenology, judging people by skull shapes.
Precisely. Or the really dark chapters of eugenics, which used flimsy pseudoscience to justify forced sterilizations, racist immigration quotas, discrimination against the poor. The pattern is identical.
What is the pattern distilled?
Observe a superficial trait. Invent a connection between that trait and some kind of fixed behavioral destiny, and then use that invented connection to justify controlling, marginalizing, or excluding that entire group. It's a centuries-old playbook.
Okay. Then we move up from the axioms to the conclusions. How do we tackle those?
We need to explicitly name the logical fallacies being used, call them out, point directly at the non sequitur. How does segregation logically follow from difference? It doesn't.
And the special pleading.
Yeah, that's huge. Applying standards of morality or competence to the outgroup that are conveniently ignored or excused for the in-group, holding others to rules you don't follow yourself.
And then finally, the commands, the policy demands.
Strip away the disguise. Expose them for what they are. They aren't presented as thoughtful policy options for the common good. They need to be labeled clearly as self-serving directives. Their sole purpose is to consolidate power and status for the speaker's preferred group, regardless of the cost to everyone else.
But just poking holes isn't always enough to break the spell, is it? You mentioned something deeper, the heretical cross-reference.
Right. This is where we really dive deep. We have to show that these things presented as eternal, universal truths, like fixed biological roles or a single natural hierarchy, are actually just social constructs. They're contingent, they were built, they can be questioned.
How do we demonstrate that contingency?
By contrasting the rigid dogma with completely different yet equally established systems of thought from other traditions. Take biological essentialism, this idea of a fixed, predetermined self.
Okay. What do we contrast that with?
We can bring in, say, Buddhist Anatta, the doctrine of no self. This ancient philosophical tradition argues that our feeling of having a solid, permanent I or identity is itself an illusion.
Wow. That's a direct challenge.
It's fundamental. And Buddhism goes further, suggesting that clinging to these fixed labels, rigid gender roles, fixed racial identities, is actually a primary source of human suffering. It doesn't just disagree, it reframes the core axiom as psychologically harmful.
And from a power perspective, you mentioned Foucault.
Yeah, Foucaultian analysis provides another lens. The red pill system claims it's revealing the natural truth about identity. Foucault flips that. He suggests there is no natural identity, just waiting to be found.
So where do categories like normal and deviant come from?
Foucault argues they are created by powerful institutions, medicine, law, traditional gender norms, specifically as a way to exercise what he called biopower.
Biopower, meaning the power to manage populations.
Exactly, controlling populations by defining what's normal and what needs to be corrected or excluded. And seen through that lens, the red pill system, with its rigid rules for masculinity or competence, isn't liberating you at all.
It's actually imposing its own form of biopower, defining a very narrow normal that you have to conform to, or else you're deviant, beta, whatever.
Precisely. It reveals the manosphere not as freedom, but as another system of intense social control and governance, just hidden behind claims of revealing truth.
Okay, so that tackles essentialism. What about the natural order fallacy, that idea of one perfect patriarchal hierarchy?
We can use the same cross-reference technique. Contrast that rigid, domination-based structure with something like Taoism. The Tao emphasizes dynamic balance, yin and yang. These aren't powers where one dominates the other. They're complementary forces, constantly interacting, flowing.
The goal is harmony, fluidity, the opposite of rigidity.
Fundamentally opposed. And for a concrete historical counterexample, we look outside Western traditions entirely. Look at various indigenous two-spirit traditions.
These recognize non-binary gender roles historically.
Yes, many indigenous cultures had complex understandings of gender and identity, integrating people who didn't fit a simple male-female binary long before European colonization. Their existence is powerful proof that the patriarchal binary system isn't some universal natural order.
It's just one cultural construct, one that often required violence to impose itself.
Exactly. It had to suppress alternatives to achieve dominance, knowing that history shatters the claim that it's the only natural way.
All right, let's get really specific now. We need to catalog these core deceptions, the recurring lies embedded in this rhetoric, and trace their history. Because understanding how these trips have been used before really defangs them in the present.
Agreed. Let's start with deception. #1. Statistical literalism as inherent criminality. This is the direct application of that axiom we talked about. Using cherry-picked data, like that infamous 1350 statistic you often hear cited.
To claim that the number itself proves a biological tendency towards crime in a whole group of people.
Yes. And the core flaw, the trick, is the complete suppression of evidence. The correlation-causation fallacy on steroids, all context is just deleted.
So when you actually look at the real context, maybe generations of housing discrimination like redlining, specific mass incarceration policies, economic divestment from communities, documented bias in policing.
When you factor all that in, suddenly the statistic doesn't look like biological destiny at all. It looks like a snapshot of social oppression. The rhetoric works simply by erasing all that history, all that systemic reality.
Leaving the number floating free, ready to be pinned on inherent traits.
Exactly. And who does this serve? What power structure benefits? It directly feeds the carceral state, the system of prisons and policing, and what some analysts call racial capitalism.
Oh.
This rhetoric justifies harsher policing, longer sentences, more prisons. Basically, punitive policies that maintain the existing social hierarchy and keep certain communities under control, which conveniently distracts from the economic structures that might benefit from, say, cheap labor, or the profits of privatized prisons.
And you said there's a strong historical parallel. This isn't new.
Not at all. It's a recycled tactic. Just look back at the 19th century in the U.S. You had widespread myths about the inherent Irish temperament, supposedly prone to alcoholism and violence. Later, similar claims about Italian criminality.
And they used statistics or pseudo-statistics back then, too?
Absolutely. Identical logic, using claims of inherent traits to justify discrimination, block immigration, limit job opportunities. It shows the pattern isn't about discovering truth. It's a tool of targeted simplification used over to define who's in and who's the dangerous other at any given moment.
Wow. Okay, moving on. Deception, #2. Pathologizing identity.
This is the relentless effort to frame identities that don't conform to the norm, especially transgender identity, not just as different or even wrong, but as a form of dangerous mental illness, sometimes even linked to violence or threats against children.
That sounds like pure fear-based control and historical revisionism, rewriting history to erase variance.
It is. The goal is to establish a very narrow, medicalized definition of what's normal, and anything outside that definition requires intervention, sometimes state intervention.
And the power served here seems pretty clear.
It directly props up the authority of traditional patriarchal and religious institutions. These institutions often rely heavily on rigid, binary definitions of sex, gender, family structure, and morality. If those definitions become fluid, their own authority structure starts to wobble.
And the historical parallel for pathologizing different.
It's deeply disturbing. Pathologization was a key weapon of colonialism worldwide, when European colonizers encountered indigenous cultures with concepts like two-spirit people.
They didn't just disagree, they actively tried to destroy it.
Yes. They often rebranded respected spiritual or social roles as deviance, sin, or sickness. This justified stripping people of their status, breaking down social structures, and imposing the colonizers' norms through force. It's always been a tactic to police difference and enforce conformity to the dominant group's standards.
Okay, next. You grouped deceptions, #4 and #3 together, relating to justifications for male dominance.
Yeah. They often work in tandem as a kind of moral shield. Let's start with deception #4. Women as universal liabilities.
This is the idea that because of average physical differences, women are just inherently unsuitable for certain high-stress or dangerous roles. Like, they're always a weak link.
Exactly. It's a sweeping, rigid overgeneralization. It's based on what seems like obvious observation, but ignores individual variation and context completely. It's a kind of willful bafflement, refusing to see nuance.
And the counter-evidence.
It's overwhelming and immediately demolishes the premise. Just one example. Think about the thousands of Soviet female snipers during World War II.
Right, operating under the most extreme conditions imaginable.
Extreme physical danger, intense psychological stress, requiring incredible skill, precision, endurance. Their documented success proves the argument isn't about biological fact. It's about social constraints being forced by ideology. The liability claim is a choice, not a reality.
Okay, and that pairs with deception, #3. Male societal contribution excuses violence.
Yes. This is the really insidious one. It's the notion that because men, statistically, might be more involved in things like heavy industry, construction, defense, high-risk jobs, that this contribution to society somehow gives them a pass, a moral license for bad behavior in private life.
Like being abusive, controlling, dominating in relationships.
Exactly. That their public contribution excuses private tyranny.
Which is just ethically bankrupt. It sounds like special pleading again, different rules for them, and a false dichotomy, as if contributing to society and being a decent human are mutually exclusive choices.
Textbook examples. And the historical link is chillingly consistent. It's the exact same logic used in the civilizing mission, justification for colonialism. We bring roads and administration, therefore we're entitled to exploit and rule.
Or the abusive patriarch saying, I pay the bills, therefore I make the rules, and you tolerate my behavior.
Precisely. Societal contribution, real or imagined, is weaponized. It's treated as moral currency to purchase the right to dominate others.
Okay, finally, the big one. The recruitment tool. Deception #5. The meritocracy myth.
Ah, yes. The claim that we used to have a pure functional meritocracy where only talent and hard work matter, but now it's being destroyed. Ruined by woke politics, diversity quotas.
And that's why people, specifically the in-group listener, are struggling economically.
That's the narrative. The flaw here is massive. It's pure ahistorical myth-making, total suppressed evidence.
Because this pure meritocracy they're nostalgic for.
It never actually existed. Not in the history of capitalism, anyway. Merit has always been filtered through factors like inherited wealth, your family background, racial biases, gender preferences. The idea of a level playing field is the myth, not the reality.
So who benefits from propagating this myth? What power does it serve?
This one serves capital and entrenched class hierarchies in a huge way. And this is where it gets really sophisticated psychologically.
How so?
The narrative function of this meritocracy myth today is basically the modern version of old justifications, like the Protestant work ethic or the rags to riches American dream. It's designed to do one crucial thing: misdirect anger.
Anger about what?
Anger about systemic failures. The reality that things like financialization, globalization, automation, and deliberate policy choices have hammered working and middle-class opportunities for decades. It takes that legitimate anger.
And blames it not on the system or the powerful.
But on individual moral failings, you're not working hard enough. Or, even more effectively, redirects it into resentment of other marginalized groups. They're getting handouts. They took your spot.
So it prevents people from looking up at the structures of power.
It makes them look sideways or down at their neighbors. It's a brilliant way to deflect criticism from the economic elite and channel all that potentially revolutionary energy into squabbling amongst the less powerful. Genius in a dark way.
Okay, we've spent a lot of time taking the machine apart, looking at the flawed axioms, the illogical conclusions, the historical precedents for the lies. But now, the really critical question. Why does it work? Why does a system built on such shaky ground feel so persuasive to so many people?
That's the core, isn't it? We have to look at what this rhetoric does to the person who buys into it, how it functions psychologically.
And you said it all comes back to one central unifying lie.
I think so. Ultimately, it's the seductive promise that all the complex, messy, frustrating problems of human existence, economic insecurity, political chaos, difficult relationships, feeling lost, have simple answers.
Simple, biological, hierarchical answers.
Exactly. It's basically a reactionary simplification masquerading as profound insight. It sells this very primitive tribal fantasy, us versus them, clear enemies, simple rules as the ultimate red-pilled awakening. The hidden truth.
But there's a trade-off. A cost.
A huge cost. When you really boil it down, the deal being offered is this. You get the incredible comfort of certainty. You get the deep satisfaction of having a clear, blamable enemy for all your problems. But the price...
Intellectual surrender.
Intellectual surrender, yes. And the quiet, maybe even unconscious acceptance of an inherently authoritarian worldview. You trade the hard work, the ambiguity, the burden of critical thinking, for the immense relief of knowing exactly who to hate and what to do.
Okay, let's break that down. How does each deception work as a specific psychological trap? The sources called this the freedom lens perspective. Like, you're trading real freedom for a feeling of safety.
Yeah, it's a useful frame. Look at Prap 1, built on statistical literalism. How does that trap someone psychologically?
It gets them to blame their neighbors, people maybe in the same boat economically.
Precisely. It convinces individuals, often struggling themselves, to point the finger at people right next door, people who might share their class background, their local economic woes. And worse, it encourages them to actively support punitive policies. More policing, longer sentences, harsher laws.
Which, ironically...
The devastating irony is that those very policies, mass incarceration, divestment from social programs, militarized policing, often end up harming their own communities most severely in the long run. Weakening social ties, removing economic opportunities, increasing state control.
So you become an agent in tightening your own chains, essentially, internalizing the logic of the carceral state.
You do. You're convinced you're protecting yourself, but you're actually reinforcing the structures that might ultimately oppress you too.
Okay. What about Trap 2, based on pathologizing identity? How does that work psychologically?
This one turns the inner world against itself. By framing normal human exploration, figuring out who you are, questioning norms, exploring gender or sexuality as a dangerous mental illness.
It makes self-discovery feel risky, threatening.
Exactly. It medicalizes your internal landscape. Identity itself, if it deviates, becomes a kind of thought crime. The natural, necessary process of figuring yourself out gets redefined as a pathology that needs fixing or even state intervention. It instills fear of your own internal complexity.
Wow. Turning the quest for self-knowledge into a source of anxiety.
And justifying external control over that internal world.
Okay. And then the third trap, the one you called the most dangerous, Trap 3, built on the meritocracy myth.
Yes, because this one takes arguably the most powerful, potentially transformative emotion, genuine righteous anger about economic injustice, and completely neutralizes it, or worse, redirects it.
How? It acknowledges the anger is real.
It acknowledges the pain, yes.
Yeah.
The feeling that the system is rigged, that opportunities are shrinking, that your hard work isn't paying off like it used to, that anger is valid.
Yeah.
But then the trap acts like a psychological lightning rod.
Zapping that energy away from the real sources.
Precisely. It prevents that anger from being directed upwards, towards the systemic issues, towards concentrated wealth and power. Instead, it channels it in two main directions.
Which are?
Either inwards, into personal shame and self-blame. I must not be good enough. I failed. I need to just try harder within this broken system.
Or far more commonly and destructively.
Sideways, into resentment of other marginalized groups. They stole my job. They're getting special treatment. Immigrants are the problem. DEI is ruining everything.
It creates infighting among the people who might otherwise unite to challenge the system.
It's incredibly effective political engineering. The system tells the listener they're suffering because they're victims of these other groups, these unfair inversions, when in reality, they are often victims of the very same overarching economic system that this rhetoric ultimately helps protect and preserve.
So they feel trapped.
They feel trapped, angry, and confused. And the rhetoric convinces them that the bars in their cage were put there by the people in the next cell, not by the architect of the prison itself.
Okay. So if this whole reactionary system is built on rigidity, on biological destiny, on hierarchy, on simplifying complexity, then the real way out, the antidote, has to lie in the opposite direction, right?
Exactly. It has to be about embracing complexity, acknowledging choice, and understanding our interconnectedness. We need to look at philosophical frameworks that directly counter the core essentialism holding this whole trap together.
So challenging that determinism, the idea that biology is fixed destiny, where do we start?
One powerful starting point is Stoic individualism. And I don't mean the modern, often misunderstood version of just passively enduring suffering.
What is classical Stoicism about then?
It's an active philosophy. Crucially, it argues that we should judge people ourselves and others based only on their character, their chosen actions, their virtue, right here, right now.
So it directly counters the statistical literalism.
Absolutely. It provides the ethical counterpunch. If you encounter someone, Stoicism says your moral obligation is to assess their specific integrity, their choices, their actions. You don't get to judge them or hold them responsible based on some flawed, context-free statistic about a group they happen to belong to.
It forces you back to the individual level, reclaiming that personal judgment and accountability.
Fundamentally, it rejects the collective blame game that the reactionary dogma relies on.
Okay, so Stoicism helps challenge the determinism. But what about the intense individualism, that kind of every man for himself, zero-sum thinking that seems common in these spaces?
Right. We need to challenge that too. And a really powerful counter comes from the South African Ubuntu philosophy. Its core idea is often translated as I am because we are.
I am because we are. What does that mean in practice?
It means your identity, your success, even your basic security, isn't something you achieve against others or in spite of them. It's fundamentally tied up with the health, the stability, the well-being of your entire community.
That's a radical shift from the competitive hierarchical view.
It's completely different. The reactionary architecture frames almost every interaction, man versus woman, race versus race, even different viewpoints as a constant power struggle. Ubuntu says, no, the highest form of individual fulfillment actually comes through positive connection and interdependence. Our humanity is shared.
Okay. So we've challenged determinism with Stoicism, challenged hyper-individualism with Ubuntu. What about the reliance on external commands, that comfort of just being told what to do, who to be?
For that, we can turn to existentialism.
Like Sartre, Camus, what's the core idea there that helps?
Existentialism champions radical self-creation. It embraces what they famously call the burden of freedom. It directly attacks the idea that your identity is pre-written, whether by biology, God, or some natural law.
So no script.
No script. You are born into the world, existentialism says, and then you define who you are through your choices, your actions, your commitments. You build your meaning.
How does that counter the red pill appeal?
Well, the reactionary system offers relief, right? The relief of having your identity prepackaged. Here's what a real man is. Follow these rules. It tells you who to be, what to value, who to blame. Existentialism looks at that relief and calls it a cage.
It says true freedom is harder.
It demands you accept the potentially terrifying truth. You are responsible for creating your own life, your own values, from the ground up. There's no guru, no biological imperative, no natural order that can do it for you. That responsibility is heavy, it can be scary, but existentialism argues it's also the only source of authentic meaning and genuine freedom.
So the real deep dive isn't about finding the one simple answer someone else is selling you.
No, the real journey, the true liberation, comes from accepting the messy, difficult, sometimes scary, but ultimately beautiful complexity of actual freedom. Recognizing that identity, society, meaning these are dynamic things we build, not static things we discover pre-made.
You get to decide. That's the real power.
And that's our deep dive for this week.
Remember, the most dangerous illusion is the one you don't know you're in.
But now you know. So here's our question for you. So we've torn apart the red pill narrative. Now the real question is, what is the one idea you've held on to that you're finally ready to put on the chopping block?
Let us know in the comments.
Question the narrative. Deconstruct the dogma. See the system.
We'll see you next time. Stay skeptical. Thank you for joining us.